Welcome to Fatima Today. I'm John Veneri, editor of Catholic Family News, filling in for your regular host, Father Nicholas Gruner. Today on our program, we have Colleen Hammond. She is author of a very popular book called Dressing with Dignity. It's all on the issue of dignity, feminine modesty, male modesty too. There's a lot to talk about. And we'll get straight to our conversation. Welcome to the program,
Thanks,
Colleen.
John. Thank you.
I guess the first thing we could do is talk about this book itself. It's an unusual book. It's had tremendous success in the United States, in the English-speaking world. Clearly, you found a niche. Not that you were looking for one, but you found a niche, and people responded to it. So could you tell the story of how the book came to be?
Actually, I was out in California at a conference, and I was there doing some radio for a Catholic network. And Dr. Alice von Hildebrand was one of the guest speakers. Well, she and I got into a number of conversations about various issues, and she started talking about the dignity of women and what a tremendous role and gift it is that women have and how they have pretty much abandoned that role. And then she started talking a lot about modesty. So the more I never heard any of these things before, and the more she started talking about it, the more I thought this is something that really needs to be broadcast on a bigger stage. So I said to Dr. von Hildebrand, I said, you really need to write a book about this. This really should be your next book. And she said, oh, Colleen, who's going to listen to a little old lady? You are the one that needs to write this book. With your background, women will listen to you as opposed to listening to me. And so, of course, anytime somebody tells you that, I really feel that God wants you to do this, I said, oh, I need to pray about it. So I actually went and I prayed about it, and I was in a chapel at Perpetual Adoration, and I said, just for God to try to send me some sign that was really obvious, because I'm a little dense. I want an obvious sign. And I saw a book sitting on the pew, and I picked it up, and it was The 40 Dreams of John Bosco. Mm-hmm. And so I did one of those, I flipped through and, oh, God, speak to me. And I just flipped through a random page and pointed my finger to the next open page. And it said, in the issue of modesty, there is no sin that is not mortal. Mm. And I thought, ooh, okay, best 2 out of 3. And so I flipped through the book again and did it again. And 3 times in a row, actually, it came up to something about modesty. Well, if you've ever read, the 40 Dreams.
I knew it was coming.
Yeah, there's a lot in there on modesty, but the chances for something like that happening 3 times. And I did ask for God to make it very obvious to me. And, it's one of those things that a prayer was actually answered instantaneously. So I ended up writing it, and then the more I researched about it, the more I realized that pretty much everything in my closet had to go. So my husband wasn't exactly thrilled because it was an excuse to go shopping and replace my entire wardrobe. But that's how it got started, and it was not anything I wanted to do. I had absolutely no intention. And if I knew then what I know now, how much my life has changed for good and for bad, I think that's why God doesn't reveal your future. You might not go there. So, but it was an important event.
Well, it's a daunting step writing for other women how to dress, because it's not always taken well. But Dr. von Hildebrand did say, with your background, people might listen. Now, why did she say that?
My background is, well, I guess you have to start back. I was born in 1962, so you can do the math and figure that out. So it was a very volatile time, not only in the church, but it was also a volatile time in the world. And going to school, we learned a lot of things that weren't necessarily Catholic, that were being taught by people who were supposed to be Catholic.
Yes.
So there was a lot of confusion at the time. And of course, my parents were being told by their administrators at their church, no, this is what you have to listen to us. You have to listen to us. We're doing the right thing. And my mother could not reconcile the faith that she had grown up with what we were learning now in catechism class. So she pulled me out of all the catechism classes and taught me at home, and I'm very thankful that she did. When I was around 10 years old, I actually found a little booklet in church about Our Lady of Fatima. And I read the book, and I was absolutely enthralled, and went to my parents and said, we need to be praying the rosary. We need to, these are important messages. It wasn't like God accidentally, oh, how did Mary get out of heaven? This is all part of God's plan to allow this message to come to us, and we need to pray the rosary. And that's how I started praying a daily rosary. And it came at a good time because it was my formation that by the time I was 14 years old, I started to do a lot of modeling and acting and saving a lot of money. so that by the time I got to college age, I was modeling full time, and all of the money I made modeling was paying for my education. And I was studying at the time to be a doctor. I wanted to go into medicine, but in controlling. But the interesting thing is I really had no formation in the faith, but I really feel that it was Our Lady of Fatima in my praying that daily rosary that kept me and gave me an internal sense of what was right and what was wrong, and it kept me out of a lot of modeling jobs that would have been very immoral. I just thought, no, that's not right, I can't do that. No, that's not right, I can't do that. So that's how my whole career went, and I ended up my senior year in college, the very last year at university, I got a job working at the Weather Channel. And so I started doing weather at the Weather Channel and ended up not going to medical school, and it actually fell two classes short of my degree because of this great job that I got. So I worked in television for a number of years, and it wasn't until I actually got pregnant and my first son was born, and that's when I flat out quit television. And I was at the height of my career. I was about to work for the NBC Today show in New York City.
Yeah, you had a contract that was quite tempting.
Yeah, I had a very good contract, and I was very pregnant, and they wanted me to get on a plane and fly up to New York City to sign my contract, and I was right at the end, and I said, my doctor said, no, you get on a plane, you'll give birth, you know, you're so close to giving birth. So I didn't go, but then it was when my son was born, and they put him in my arms, and I looked down at this child, and I thought, I can never leave him. I can't go back to work. So I turned down the job, and I was afraid that my agent was going to sue me and that the NBC Today show would sue me, but thankfully they let me out of the contract because I technically hadn't signed the dotted line, so I did get out of it and ended up staying home. So that's what Dr. von Hildebrand was talking about when she said that she's a little gray-haired lady who would listen to her, but she knew with my background in modeling and acting, my background in television, that, you know, in the background that I didn't dress properly. And I had been exposed to a lot of things where, you know, hey, I've done it the wrong way, and now I see the truth, and why not just change it and do it the correct way?
And also, as a model, you know a little bit about fashion.
Just a little bit. Just a little bit.
So some of the basic questions we have, of course, is that need to be answered for a modern audience is, what is modesty? Because I know of a little Catholic girl, who was talking to another little Catholic girl. This Catholic girl was traditional, the other one was going to the modern Catholic schools. And the term modesty came up, and the modern Catholic says, what's that word? What does that mean? I never heard that word before.
Well, I'm not surprised. I try to find a book on modesty. You know, they're very few and far between.
Yes.
So it's very shocking to us, I think, when you I'm very shocked that you had never heard the word modesty before. But then again, when you think about the culture that we're in, and how television is inundating us.
Well,
with
I mean, I'm sure she
image.
knew all about global warming, and saving the whales and all this
Her
thing.
carbon footprint.
Her carbon footprint and all that. But modesty was a word she had never heard before.
That's shocking. Well, and I think this lends to it, the entire issue as well, is no one's talking about it. Mm-hmm. And I know a number of priests that say they just give people my book, because if they try to talk to a family about, okay, your teenage daughter, she's not dressed appropriately, if she's coming to Mass, or if she's coming, if it's not for sale, why does she look like she's trying to sell her body if she doesn't intend to have it for sale? And women will say to these priests who are trying to form their soul and help them grow in virtue, women will say to the priests, what are you doing looking at my teenage daughter? Well, it's like a train wreck. Sometimes you pass this huge car accident on the freeway, and there's dead bodies all over the place, and it's so horrific you don't want to look, but you find yourself staring. That's almost how it's become in our culture anymore, the way some people dress, if you want to be Lady Gaga or whatever. It's such a shock to see how people dress. You find yourself staring.
Well, another thing, too, about that is this is something that Hollywood and advertising knows, that they put these scantily dressed people in the ads for the movies, in the ads for the clothes, in the ads for the perfumes, so people will be attracted to it.
Right.
They shouldn't be attracted to it, but fallen human nature is going to find themselves looking even when they don't want to.
Absolutely.
As Father Wickens used to say, it's not the first look that gets you in trouble, it's the second look.
Keep looking, yeah. But that was the problem with these priests that I've run across, is that the women, instead of saying, thank you, Father, for trying to save our souls, it's, what are you doing looking at my teenage daughter? There's nothing wrong with how she dresses. And I have a number of mothers that come to me with the same thing. How can I get my teenage daughter to dress in a more dignified manner? And you look at what the mothers are wearing, you know, and what do you say? They copy what they see around them. You know, if you need to set that kind of an example, and oh, well, whenever I leave the house, I look nice. Well, what do your children see you 90% of the time? They see you around the home. They need to see you modeling appropriate behavior, not just modeling appropriate clothing, in the home. And so, you know, it's bringing that issue right back to the mother and the father, which is where it belongs. And I say to fathers especially, you are the one that knows more than anybody else, more than your wife or your daughters, how men are wired and how they think. Don't pay for these things. And that's the other thing I'm telling these moms. They're looking at their 12-year-olds.
I was just thinking that, yeah, the 12-year-olds, who's buying their clothes?
Where are they getting the money?
Yeah.
Oh, from mommy and daddy.
Yeah.
So they have to snap the wallet shut and make sure that their daughters care more about their daughter's soul as opposed to her being popular. And I'm not saying that somebody has to go out dressed all frumpy. You know, I just saw a whole line of clothes that just went down the runway for this fall, and there are, you know, from Paris and from Milan. There are a number of very beautiful outfits that we can wear that are in fashion that are perfectly appropriate and follow all the Vatican guidelines from what is considered the objective standard of modesty.
Well, getting back to that little girl, what is modesty? Where do you start with someone in the modern culture who is completely clueless is a bad word, but I'll use it. They're completely clueless. Where do you start when someone says, well, what is modesty? Where do you start?
Well, it's hard with modesty because it's not just about exterior. You know, it goes deeper, and we were talking earlier how all these virtues tie together. So, you know, modesty is also tied in with humility. It's also tied in with fortitude and temperance. You know, everything all revolves around that. But in this fallen culture, and when we're so inundated with all of these images that we see in our culture today, it's hard to define, you know, what is modesty. So what I try to talk to young girls about who are clueless is, you know, what is dignified? You know, modesty, immediately they think frumpy, and that's
Sure.
not what it is. Yeah. It's being regal, it's being dignified, it's having a sense of class. And so then you back it up and you look, and I try to teach these girls, and I show them a PowerPoint presentation and photographs from where fashion has always been, how women have always dressed. And when you take, you know, not just artwork, but you take, you know, the sculptures, and you go back 2,000-3,000 years and see how women have been treated, good and bad, but how women have been treated, and how women, most importantly, have always dressed. And when you look at the artwork and you look at the culture of all these years, in Judeo-Christian cultures, women have always worn long dresses, they've always had something on their head, and they've always had something around their waist that defined the waist. And so long sleeves, long dresses, something around the waist and something on the head. You follow that fashion all the way through. And when these young girls see that this is the way women have always dressed, this is the way women have always been treated as, you know, not just in a bad light, but in the positive way, that women have been held up and held on a pedestal, that, you know, what's wrong with being treated like a queen? What's wrong with being treated with respect?
Do you think some of these older cultures understood just the basic concepts better than we do today of a feminine nature and a masculine nature?
Absolutely, because now it's politically incorrect to say that men and women are different. And, you know, being you know, a medical background and studying science and looking at the physiology and the hormone structure, there is a tremendous difference between men and women, but we're not allowed to say that anymore. The sad thing, the very sad commentary that I see in many movies today is women, in order to try to make themselves equal to men. Well, first of all, let's talk about the equal part. Women have always been equal in dignity with men. We're just separate in our roles and in our functions. You know, this is the way God made us. So when we take those roles and functions and work together, we make a much stronger unit. But when a woman tries to say, well, I'm not going to do the womanly things, I'm going to do what men do, then all of that feminine culture is left undone. So
it's sneered at.
or I'm sorry?
It's sneered at.
It's sneered at, absolutely.
Yeah,
It's ridiculed.
Yeah.
So now in movies, we see women taking on men's roles. And a lot of popular movies are the men sitting back and the women going out and conquering the world. But worse yet is that now women, in order to show that they're equal to men, I suppose, in these movies have become all these superheroes. And they're out, we're going to beat up men. Then they're showing men and women fighting and men hitting women over and over and over again. And we wonder why we have more violence against women when all of our young men are growing up watching all of these movies of men beating on women and women trying to fight back. Well, in the movie, they kind of may win at the end. But those images,
Yes.
and then of course it's a movie, so she's going to win at the end, but those images are always there. So so many issues, tying into this whole idea of going back to this 12-year-old girl of what is modesty. You have to kind of look at what is femininity as well, and what is the feminine role, and what is the feminine ideal, and not being afraid to embrace. Don't be embarrassed of the fact that you're a woman. Don't be embarrassed about being a young lady, but to embrace their femininity.
Well, I remember one time talking to, this is years ago, talking to a young woman who was confused about this type of thing. And I just asked her point blank, I said, "Are you attracted to a feminine man?" And she recoiled in horror. She said, "No." I said, "Then what makes you think a man will be attracted to a masculine woman?" They're not.
They're not.
They're not, because they're going against nature. And as you say, the modern feminine movement, they seem to equate dignity with feminism. They equate dignity with feminism, and so to be feminine, to be a woman today means you have to be more masculine than the men.
And I think G.K. Chesterton said it the best when he said a feminist is really somebody who hates femininity.
Yeah.
They're embarrassed about their femininity, and so they're trying to really be more like a man. And the problem I see a lot in the culture, and my husband has shared this with me as well from what he sees in the business world, is when women try to be more like a man, they tend to pick up all of men's worst traits. The carousing and the drinking and the
bad
smoking
language.
and the bad language, exactly. Where the thing I appreciate most about my husband and about men is the fact that they can make very unemotional and logical decisions. Where my emotions always get all tied in, my husband can just boil it down to the brass tacks and say, this is it. And it kind of clears the air and takes all the emotion out of it. So there's, but again, sometimes his decisions can be very kind of cold-hearted. So I bring in more of that, well, we have to really consider a little bit what our aunt and our uncle will think about this, So there's a balance between the two. And again, it comes back to being equal in dignity, separate in roles and functions, but working together with our God-given gifts instead of denying our God-given gifts and trying to use what the other person has. Like you said, is a woman really attracted to an effeminate man?
I don't know any who are.
I don't either. I really don't.
Yeah.
They are very drawn to a very masculine man and somebody who makes decisions. But a woman will pursue a man, and then she'll be upset when she marries him that he never does anything, because she's always trying to do everything and prove. And I had a woman say that to me once. She said, well, you wear dresses all the time. Would you ever climb a ladder and get up on the roof in a dress? And I said, absolutely not. I'd let my husband do it. Why do we feel we have to do everything?
Yeah.
Just let him do it. If I really wanted to be on the roof, maybe I would, but I frankly don't care about being on the top of the house, so I won't do that. So why do we feel that we have to go out and do everything that a man does, and then demand that a man does everything at home? Why can't we just embrace our God-given roles and keep that intrinsic ordered, and everything works out much better that way?
Well, in this conversation, what occurs to me is that it's something I said earlier. It's denial of basic human nature in two ways. First of all, the fact that a man has a masculine nature, and his entire personality, how he dresses, how he acts, has to be in conformity with that. And that the woman has a feminine nature, the dress should be in conformity with that. Her whole composition should be in conformity with that. So that's the denial of nature there. And then there's also the denial of nature of what you said, of that poor priest who was trying to correct, and he was accused of, well, why are you looking at my daughter like that? It is human nature that this type of thing, the men are going to look. So it's a big fight that we have in our hands of this basic denial of human nature as is, rather than this construction of the new modern, well, what's the word I'm looking for the male and female,
Androgynous?
Yeah, the new androgynous creature who just comes on the world scene and then just circumstances make him what he is, but there is no human nature. So, a lot of it just boils down to just a complete denial of reality and everything based on sheer human will. Mm-hmm. I want to be like a man. I want to dress this way. And you must run into that all the time of just hitting the will of either of men or, dare I say, of women. Just sheer human will is, I'm not going to change my dress. How do you start with, I mean, you have to start with somebody of goodwill. I understand that first. I mean.
Right. Well, and it's interesting you say the men. The men are my biggest fans because they say, yes, finally somebody's saying this. We do want women to dress less provocatively because men do look. I just had this argument on Facebook, of all places, this morning with a woman who said, she denied the entire fact, she's men and women are the same, and it doesn't bother me to look at another woman if she's dressed provocatively, so why does it bother a man? He must be perverted. And I said, that is not the way God made it. It's like women have 4 main hormones. It's back to my science and medical background again. Women have 4 main hormones, and they fluctuate. Every day they're in a different concentration and a different variety in the bloodstream.
Cocktail, you call it?
Just a cocktail. It's a hormonal cocktail. So we have a problem with that in that, every day we're not sure what cocktail we're getting. So every day we're dealing with different emotions. Now, with a man, he has 1 hormone, and it's exactly the same all the time. Testosterone is at a flat line level all the time. So when we're talking about a hormonal reaction, when a woman has emotions and her emotions are flying, and once a month they tend to be a little bit more emotional than other times of the month, we have these hormonal reactions. Men's 1 hormone being at the same all the time, they have hormonal reactions. Now, men tend not to really understand, when a woman has this big hormonal issue. Why is she crying? Why is she so upset? And the same way, women, we have to understand that men have hormonal reactions too, to the way we dress. It's how God intended the species to continue.
And that reaction is immediate.
Yes.
For the man, it's immediate.
Right. And it's like you said earlier, it's your choice. What is it? What's the first look? And then is it a look away and a prayer? Or is it another look and a third look and a fourth look and more thoughts? So what are we doing to the men in our life? When they're having a hormonal reaction, shouldn't we respect? If we want to be treated with respect, shouldn't we treat the men in our life with respect and not walk around with, provocative clothing on, like we had talked about earlier, about a man who had said that if I walked around with a T-shirt that made racial comments and racial slurs, and I walked up to somebody, who that T-shirt was aimed at, directing, this vitriol against them, and they slugged me, well, I brought it on because I was wearing the T-shirt. It's the same thing. When women dress in a provocative manner, how do they expect to be treated?
Yes. Well, I see we're running out of time, so there's a number of things we want to talk about in future programs with Colleen Hammond. Her book, a very interesting, I think, interview that she had with MTV.
Yes.
And so with that, we will close this program and pick it up next time.